Lay one hand on her again and you'll answer to me, the giant blacksmith warned. The first thing I remember about that morning is the sound the anvil made. I'd been at it since before light. October cold, the forge not yet breathing right, and I was working a set of shoes for Harlan Decker's draft horses, big Belgians, wide hooves. The shoes had to be heavier than standard or they'd throw them on the creek road before winter. I had the iron in the coals and I was listening. You learn to listen to iron the same way you learn to listen to a horse. There's a moment it tells you it's ready, and if you miss that moment, you're working against it the rest of the way. My name is Cutter. That's what they called me then, and it stuck. My given name was Elias Cutter, and by the time I was 20, the first part had mostly fallen away. I was 39 years old that fall, 6'5", 260 pounds, and my hands looked like something a man had carved out of old saddle leather with a dull knife. I'd been running the smithy in Calverton for 11 years. Before that, I'd been a lot of other things, none of them worth dwelling on. Calverton was a supply town on the edge of nowhere particular, the kind of place that sits at a crossroads and survives by being useful. 2 mercantiles, a livery, a saloon that also served as the town's only eating house, a church that got used on Sundays and for funerals in between. And my smithy, which sat at the south end of Main Street with its back to a dry creek bed, and its front door facing the road that came in from the flatlands. I wasn't a man people talked to much. Not because they disliked me, I don't think they disliked me, but I was large in a way that made casual conversation feel like it required more effort than most folks wanted to spend. I'd heard myself described once as the kind of man you only went to when something was broke. That was fair. I didn't mind it. I had my work and I had my quiet and I had the forge, and most days that was enough. The morning she came to town, I was pulling the second shoe from the fire when I heard raised voices from the direction of the saloon. That wasn't unusual in itself. But there was something in the pitch of it. One voice going high and the other staying low and flat, which in my experience is the more dangerous of the two. The low, flat voice is the one that's already decided something. I set the shoe on the anvil and left it, walked out to the street with the hammer still in my hand. There were 4 men standing in front of the saloon, which wasn't yet open for the day. One of them I recognized right away, Dolph Searcy, who'd ridden into Calverton about 3 weeks prior with 2 others and set himself up like he was staying. I didn't know what his business was exactly. Nobody did, which was part of what made the town uncomfortable around him. He had that quality some men have where they're always watching and you never know what for. The other 3 with him were his men. And there was a woman. She was standing with her back against the saloon wall, a carpetbag at her feet, and she had her chin up the way a person does when they're frightened but they've made a decision about not showing it. Her coat was a dark green wool, road-dusted. She was maybe 30, maybe a little older, with dark hair and a kind of stillness about her face that I read, even from across the street, as something earned rather than natural. Searcy had his hand on her arm. His grip wasn't casual. I crossed the street. I didn't hurry. There's no point in hurrying in those situations. Hurrying tells the other man that you're worried about being in time, and if you're worried about being in time, you've already lost a step. I walked at my pace, which was my pace, and I watched Searcy the whole way. He saw me coming about halfway across. His eyes moved to me and stayed there. I came up level with them, and I stopped. Close enough that he had to look up at me, which wasn't a thing Dolph Searcy was accustomed to. "Morning," I said. He didn't let go of her arm. "Smith," he said. He had a way of saying a word like it was a small door he was closing. "That's right," I said. I looked at his hand on her arm, then I looked at him. "Let her go," I said. The way he smiled then, it was the smile of a man doing arithmetic, figuring odds. He looked at the hammer in my hand at my shoulders, and his smile got a little less certain around the edges, but he didn't move his hand. "The lady and I are having a conversation," he said. No, I said, you're not. I reached out and I put 2 fingers on his wrist, right at the pulse point, and I applied pressure. Not a grab, just pressure, and the particular kind of it. He let go. He had to. His face went white and then red, and his hand came away from her. He took a step back. His men stirred. I didn't look at them. I kept my eyes on Circe. I've got work to do, I said. You've got work to do. Let's all go do our work. He stood there a moment longer than he wanted to. That was the tell, when a man stands there longer than is comfortable because he can't figure how to leave without losing something. I held his eyes until he made up his mind. Then he turned, and his men turned with him, and they went back inside the saloon. I bent down and picked up the woman's carpet bag. She was looking at me with a kind of measured appraisal, not relief exactly, not yet. More like she was still deciding what had just happened. I'm Cutter, I said. I run the smithy. I know, she said. I've been watching your forge for the last hour, trying to figure out if you were approachable. Am I said. Apparently, she said. Her name was Nora Gale. She'd come to Calverton on the eastbound stage from Fort Abilene because she'd heard there was work at the Mercantile, or had heard there might be, which was a different thing. She had a sister in a town called Redwater, 2 days' ride east, and she'd been working her way toward her with what she had, which wasn't much. The carpet bag, $21, a skill at figures, and a letter of reference from a dry goods store in Kansas City where she'd worked 2 years before her husband died. Her husband had been dead 8 months. His name had been John Gale, and he'd been a surveyor for the railroad, and he'd died of a fever in a tent camp outside of Wichita, and she'd been trying to get herself to her sister ever since. Circe had been on the same stage, had made himself known to her in the way men like Circe make themselves known, gradual, then sudden, with the assumption that the gradualness had softened her up enough that the sudden part would be welcome. It hadn't been. She'd gotten off in Calverton figuring she could lose him if she could find a reason to stay for a week or 2. The mercantile job, if it existed, would be that reason. She told me all of this standing outside my smithy, in about the time it took the iron I'd left on the anvil to cool to useless. I listened. I don't talk much, but I listen well. When she was done, I said, Mrs. Haverson at the Mercantile. She's been running the place alone since her husband passed in the spring. She needs help. Go in and tell her I sent you. Nora looked at me for a moment. Does your recommendation carry weight? With Edna Haverson it does, I said. She's had me fix her roof twice. That almost got a smile. Not quite. She picked up her bag. I'd set it down, and then she stopped. The man you moved out of my way, she said. He's not going to forget that. No, I said, he isn't. Are you going to be all right? I thought about that. It seemed like an unusual thing for a woman in her position to be asking, less than 10 minutes after meeting me. I appreciated it. Yes, I said, but thank you for asking. She nodded once, and she walked up the street toward Haverson's Mercantile, and I went back inside and put fresh coal on the fire. Edna Haverson hired her. I heard about it that afternoon from Burl Phipps, who ran the livery next door and made it his business to know everything that happened in Calverton by the end of each day. Burl was 60-something, bowed in the legs, and had an opinion about everyone. His opinion about Nora Gale, delivered while I shoed his spare mule, was that she seemed like a woman who'd seen hard luck but hadn't let it make her brittle. That seemed right to me. Circe I saw twice more that day, once from across the street, once when he walked past the open door of my smithy and slowed, looking in. I kept working. After a moment he walked on. There are men who test you and there are men who plan, and in my experience Circe was both. The testing was just to see what kind of man he was dealing with. The planning would come later, once he'd satisfied himself on that question. I'd seen enough men like him to know the shape of it. I didn't tell Nora Gale any of this. She'd had enough unpleasant information for one day. What I did do was speak to Sheriff Ames that evening. Ames was a decent enough man, not brave exactly, but decent, which is its own kind of useful. He was afraid of Circe in the quiet way that men are afraid of something they can't quite see the edges of. I didn't blame him for it. I just wanted him to know that I was aware of the situation and intended to stay aware of it. Ames said he'd keep an eye on things. I believed he'd try. I walked home through the dark, which was 200 yards behind the smithy, a small house I'd built with my own hands over 2 summers, solid but plain. I ate supper standing at the kitchen window, looking out at nothing in particular, and I thought about the way Nora Gale had stood against that wall with her chin up. The choice in it. The decision not to buckle, even when she was afraid. I've known that kind of courage in a person and I've respected it each time. It's not the loud kind. It doesn't make speeches. It just stays standing. She came to the smithy 3 days later. She came in the morning, before the day got going, and she stood in the doorway until I noticed her and set down what I was doing. "I wanted to thank you properly," she said. "I had nothing to give you the first morning." "You didn't owe me anything the first morning," I said. "No, but I'd like to now." She held out a tin. "I baked last night. Mrs. Haverson has an oven." I took the tin. Inside were 6 biscuits, still warm through the metal. I didn't say anything for a moment. "I haven't had a biscuit made by someone else in a long time," I said finally. "How's the solitary life otherwise?" she said. I looked at her. She had a directness that was like a hand extended, no performance in it, just offered plainly. "Quiet," I said. "I like quiet." "So do I," she said. "I used to think that was odd in a woman. My mother talked from morning to midnight and she thought something was wrong with me." "Nothing wrong with quiet," I said. She smiled then, fully this time, and it changed her face in a way I hadn't expected. Not softened it exactly, more like it completed something. She stayed for half an hour. We talked, or she talked and I answered, which is my version of talking, about Calverton, about Mrs. Haverson, about the dry goods business, about the flatlands she'd come through on the stage. She had observations about people and places that were spare and exact, the way a person's observations are when they've learned to notice things out of necessity rather than curiosity. It's a particular kind of seeing, and I recognized it. When she left, I went back to work, but the morning felt different than it had before she arrived, and I noticed that. On the 5th day, Circe made his next move. He didn't come to me, he went to Mrs. Haverson. I heard about it from Burl again. Circe had come into the mercantile that afternoon and made a purchase, and while he was making it, he'd spoken to Nora in a way that wasn't threatening exactly, but was intended to let her know that he was still there and still thinking about her. He'd used her first name, which she hadn't given him permission to use. He'd stood a little too close. He'd left without incident, but Nora had been shaken, which she tried not to show, but Mrs. Haverson had noticed. I finished what I was doing, banked the fire, washed my hands and walked up to the mercantile. Nora was restocking shelves. She looked at me when I came in, and I could see the effort she'd put into getting herself back to level. "I heard," I said. "I'm fine," she said. "I know you are," I said. "That's not why I'm here." She waited. "I want to tell you something so you know it," I said. "While you're in Calverton, while you're working here, living here, making your way to your sister, nothing's going to happen to you that I can stop. If Circe puts his hands on you again, or if any of his men do, they'll answer to me. Not to the law, not to anyone else. To me. That's not a boast. It's just the shape of how things are going to be." She was quiet for a moment. "Why?" she said. It was a fair question, and she asked it without coyness, genuinely wanting to know. "Because you're alone here and you shouldn't have to be," I said. "And because what he did that first morning was wrong, and I was there, and I'm still here." She held my gaze for a long moment. Her eyes were dark brown, almost black in the low light of the store, and there was something in them that I can only describe as the look a person gets when they've been given something real after a long time of getting nothing but false versions of it. "All right," she said, "thank you, Cutter." "Don't thank me yet," I said. "I haven't done anything." "Yes, you have," she said. I left the mercantile and went back to work. Circe came to the smithy the following morning. He came alone, which told me something. Either he was confident enough in himself that he didn't think he needed his men, or he'd made a calculation that coming alone would seem more reasonable. Men like him always want to seem reasonable right up until they don't. He stood in the doorway. I kept working. "Smith," he said. "Cutter," I said, "that's my name." "A beat." "Cutter," he said, "I think there may have been a misunderstanding between us." "No," I said, "I don't think there was." "The woman." "Mrs. Gale," I said. "Mrs. Gale and I have a prior acquaintance. I'm simply—" "She doesn't want your acquaintance," I said. "She's made that plain. You've chosen not to hear it. Now I'm saying it for her in case the hearing's better." His jaw moved. He was working himself up to something. "You should stay out of other people's business," he said. I set down the iron I was working, and I looked at him. "Here's what I want you to understand," I said. "I'm the biggest man in this town. I've been here 11 years. I'm the only smith for 30 miles in any direction. Every rancher, every farmer, every freighter who moves through this valley knows me and knows my word. If I tell them you're a man who puts his hands on women who have said no to him, that will follow you every place you go from here. And I will tell them. I'll tell every man who sets foot in this smithy, which is every man in this valley, and it won't matter where you ride to next. The word will get there before you." He stood very still. "On the other hand," I said, "if you leave Mrs. Gale alone for the time she's in this town, don't speak to her, don't go near her, don't let your men near her, I'll say nothing. You'll leave here clean." "And if I don't," he said. "Then lay one hand on her again," I said, "and you'll answer to me." I said it quietly. That's the thing about that kind of statement, it doesn't need volume. Volume is for men who aren't sure they mean what they're saying. I was sure. Circe looked at me for a long moment. Then he looked around the smithy, at the tools on the walls, at the forge, at me, and I could see him doing that arithmetic again. This time the numbers came out different. He left without saying anything else. He was gone from Calverton inside of 3 days. He and his men rode out on a Thursday morning, headed north on the Laramie Road, and by noon the whole town knew it. Burl came to tell me like he was delivering a gift. "Reckon you had something to do with that," he said. "Reckon I didn't do anything," I said. "He made a decision." "Same thing," Burl said. I didn't argue. Nora came to the smithy that afternoon. She didn't bring biscuits this time. She just came and stood in the doorway the way she had the first morning, except that her face was different now. The held-in look was gone. She looked like a woman who'd set something heavy down. "He's gone," she said. "Yes," I said. "Did you?" "I talked to him," I said. "He made his own choice." She was quiet for a moment. Then, "Mrs. Haverson wants me to stay through winter. Says she could use the help through the cold months, and I could ride to Redwater in the spring when the roads are better." "That sounds reasonable," I said. "I think I'd like to," she said. "I think I'd like to stay." She was looking at me when she said it, and we both understood that she wasn't only talking about Mrs. Haverson's offer. I kept working, which is what I do when I don't know what else to do. The forge had a sound to it in the mornings, a kind of low, even breath, and I'd learned to find the rhythm of the day in it. "You could come to supper," I said after a moment. "I'm a plain cook, but I'm consistent." "When?" she said. "Tonight," I said, "if you want." "I want," she said. She stayed through winter. She stayed through winter and into the spring and past the spring, and by the time the roads to Redwater were passable, she'd stopped talking about them with any urgency. She went to see her sister in June. I drove her in the wagon, a day each way, and we sat on her sister's porch for an afternoon while the two of them talked, and I repaired a gate and mended a section of fence that had come apart over the winter, because that's what I do when I have idle hands. On the way back in the wagon, she put her hand on my arm. Not because she needed steadying, the road was smooth enough. She just put her hand there and left it, and we drove the rest of the way like that, her hand on my arm and the wide flat country going by on both sides and the evening light, the particular amber it gets out there in early summer, warm and long and almost too beautiful to look at straight on. I wrote to my sister last winter, she said. What did you write? I wrote that I'd found something I wasn't expecting to find. She paused. She wrote back asking what I meant. I didn't answer that letter. Why not? Because I didn't know how to explain it. I still don't know if I do. She was quiet for a bit. You're not like the men I've known. You don't talk much. You don't. She seemed to be choosing words carefully. You don't perform yourself. You just are what you are, and what you are is solid all the way through. I kept my eyes on the road. Most men I've known, she said, there's a surface, and under the surface is something softer and less sure, and they spend so much of their time protecting that inside thing that they forget to be real about anything else. She paused again. You're not like that. I didn't say anything. That morning, she said, when you walked across that street, I watched you come and I thought, here is a man who isn't afraid. Not the way that's supposed to mean, not reckless, not stupid, just not afraid. Not of Circe, not of what the town would think, not of me being a strange woman with a carpetbag and a problem that wasn't yours. It was my problem, I said. Once I crossed the street, it was mine. Why did you? She said. I'd thought about that over the months. I had an honest answer. Because it was wrong, I said, and I was there. And I'm large enough that doing something about it is possible, so not doing something about it would have been a choice I'd have had to live with. I don't like those. She was quiet. That's the whole of it, she said. That's the whole of it, I said. She squeezed my arm once and didn't say anything else for a while. We were married in October, 1 year to the month after she'd come to Calverton on that stage. We did it simply, the way both of us preferred, the preacher, Edna Haverson, and Burl Phipps as witnesses. Burl wept, which surprised nobody who knew him. Mrs. Haverson brought a cake. The ceremony was short. Neither of us wanted a performance of it. What we wanted was the fact of it, the plain, declared, public fact that this was real, and we were choosing it, and it would hold. Afterward, standing outside the church in the October sunlight, that clean, cold kind of light that comes before the first real snow, she looked up at me. She was a tall woman, Nora, but I still had 8 inches on her. She had one hand on my chest, just laid there against my shirt, and she was looking at my face with an expression that I can only say was the most honest thing anyone had ever turned toward me. Not performing happiness, not performing anything, just seeing me. All of it the size of me, the quiet of me, the years before her that hadn't been anything much and everything after, seeing it and staying. I know what I wrote to my sister, she said. What? I said. I wrote that I'd found a man who made me feel safe, she said. Not in the way of shielded or protected like I was something fragile, in the way of I am standing next to something true, something that will not move. I put my hand over hers on my chest. That's what you are to me, she said, an unmovable thing, and I want to stand next to it for the rest of my life. I kept my hand over hers. The cold was starting to come in off the plains to the north, that particular smell of it, early snow somewhere beyond the horizon. The light on the street was exact and clear. Burl was still wiping his face with his sleeve. I was not an eloquent man, and I knew it. I had tools for metal and stone and wood. I did not have tools for this. So I said the true thing, which was the only thing I had. There's nowhere else I'd want to be, I said, than where you are. She leaned her forehead against my chest, and I put my arm around her, and we stood there in that October light until Burl cleared his throat and asked if anyone was hungry. That was 22 years ago. She's in the house right now. I can hear her moving around in the kitchen, that particular sound of her, the way she sets things down without being careless about it. She's made that house something I wouldn't have thought to make it. Curtains that catch the morning light. A garden that survives because she knows which things want to be left alone and which things need attention, and she's smart enough to know the difference. She never made it to Redwater to stay. Her sister comes here now, every summer with her family, and they fill the house with noise for 2 weeks and then go. And after they go, Nora and I sit on the porch in the quiet that comes back, and we don't have to say anything about it. I'm still large, still quiet, still the only Smith for 30 miles in any direction, though I've trained 2 young men in the last decade who will take it over eventually, and that suits me. A man shouldn't be the only one who can do a necessary thing. It makes you too important. There are things that happened between that October morning and this one. Hard winters and lean years, and the ranch we bought the 4th year, and the fence lines we've run and repaired and run again. The losses that come to anyone who lives long enough. The things you carry that don't get lighter but you get stronger, and so the weight feels about the same. 2 children grown. A 3rd we didn't keep, which I won't speak of except to say that in that time she held me up the same as I'd held her up, and we came through. What I know at 61 is this. There are men who go through their whole lives and never get seen. Not truly seen, not their actual worth, what they are underneath the outside of them, the steadiness and the capability and the willingness to stand between something wrong and something right regardless of what it costs. Men who die having been looked through by most everyone they met. I was one of those men. And then a woman came to town with a carpet bag and $21 and her chin up against a wall, and she looked across a street at a man walking toward her with a hammer in his hand, and somewhere in what she saw she found something worth staying for. I have thought about that morning more times than I can count. The sound of my boots on the dirt, the way the light hit the dust on her coat, the set of her jaw. I have never once been sorry I crossed that street. I hear her call from the kitchen, supper by the sound of it. I set down the harness I've been mending, Ike Decker's, one of Harlan's boys now, same Belgian bloodline, the same wide hooves, and I wash my hands at the pump outside the back door, and I go in. She's at the stove. She turns when she hears me, and she looks at me the way she's always looked at me, that plain, direct looking that doesn't perform anything, and I feel it the same as I felt it the first time. The sensation of being known, of being found exactly where I stand and being enough. Cold out, she says. Getting there, I say. She turns back to the stove. I hang up my coat. Outside, through the kitchen window, the last of the light is going off the plains in long, gold strips, and somewhere north of us, the first snow of the season is on its way, and the forge is banked and will hold through the night. I am home. I am seen. I am exactly where I am supposed to be. That's all a man needs to know.